Hey, welcome to Session 2, Bible Studies for Life in the winter session of 2019 and 20. In this second week of the session, it answers the question, is there a God? How do we know? Now, we're in Sunday school. We're in church, right? You're in a small group Bible study time. You believe there is a God. I mean, most likely you wouldn't be here if you didn't. The question might be, how do you share that? How do you show someone? How do you let them know that there is a God? And that's what we'll talk about this morning as we look at Psalm 19 and Psalm 111. What is the evidence for God? And I want to start with something that's not in the lesson, but I think maybe it might be helpful to you. Because sometimes we need to just have a person, if you have a conversation with somebody that doesn't believe there is a God, how do you even get them into the conversation? How do you even get it started about that? And I like this illustration. I didn't make this up. I heard this a long time ago, but I think it's really good. And that is, let's say we draw a circle like this. And in that circle, we say inside this circle is everything that can possibly ever be known by anyone. So this is all the knowledge that exists. So in that circle, I might ask you, how much of that circle, if that's everything that can be known, how much of that circle do you know? Well, I'll tell you, any of us that have any sort of humility or wisdom, we've got to look at that circle and go, well, maybe I've got just this little bit, right? I got that little point. That's about all I really know, and I probably don't even know that much if we're honest, right? So then the question would be, is it possible then, if this is what you know, is it possible that the knowledge of God could exist outside of what you know, but inside of all that can be known? Is it just possible? And the idea of that is to say, could we at least just be open to the conversation that maybe there is a God that you just don't know about him, but other people do? That's all we want to do, is just open the conversation to say, maybe it's possible that God does exist. And boy, I just think most times if you share that with somebody, it's going to be really hard for them to say, well, I don't know everything, but I know God doesn't exist anywhere over here, even though I only know this little bit. It's pretty tough to say that. So if we can get to that point, maybe we can talk about some other ways that we know that God exists, or maybe we can even just say, let's just assume that he does. What does the Bible say about him? That might be one way to go about it. But Scripture certainly addresses this idea of the knowledge of God and that people know about the existence of God. Psalm 19 is a beautiful passage that begins talking about this. Heavens declare the glory of God, and the expanse proclaims the work of his hands. The heavens declare the glory of God. The creation shares with you that there is a God. The creation tells you, it makes it very clear that there is a God who exists, that it won't tell you about that God, but it indicates that he does exist. Some people have talked about it this way, that if we look at everything that exists, we say, well, everything that comes into being has a cause that causes it to come into being. Everything has a cause, and God is the first cause. God is the one at the beginning of that first cause, because everything has a cause that brings it into existence. Another way to think about creation is to say, well, creation fits neatly together. It is in order. These things all work together, and if you start to gain a little bit of knowledge about any part of the created order, you get that idea that there is an order to it. There is this beautiful symmetry of how things fit. Well, that indicates that there must have been a creator. Another one talks about in the sense of a watch. Let's say that you were going down the beach and you found a watch laying in the sand. Of course, when you pick that watch up and you saw it's working, it's a beautiful watch, you know immediately that what happened is over millions of years, sand and wind and water and sea and people walking through the sand and all these things just formed together to create a watch out of the sand. Well, we know that's not true, right? There's no way that's true. When we see the watch, we have the idea there must be a watchmaker. Well, goodness, we look at a watch and we think that. How much more if you look at the human hand? When you look at the magnificence of the human hand and you see all the pieces that come together to create the human hand, how in the world could someone believe that a watch requires a watchmaker, but a human hand does not? You see, we look at those things, the beauty of creation, and they declare there must be a God. Even the law of thermodynamics that says that things tend to disorder unless something acts on them. If energy is exerted upon them, things will just fall apart. And yet some people want us to believe that instead of things falling into disorder, things actually fell into greater order. Well, that doesn't happen without someone exerting on them, and we would say God is the one who exerted the energy to create things. The heavens declare the glory of God. The way that we know who God is, or that God exists, is because just look outside. Go to the mountains, go to the river, go to the lake. Look at your hand. Think about the human eye and all that's required for that to come together. Think about the order that we see all around us, and the way the worlds function together, and that the earth must be at a very certain place, distance from the sun, for human life to even exist. All of these things tell us there must be a God, and how amazing that God is. And yet, it does not tell us much about this God other than that he is glorious because he has created all this. How do we learn who this God is? Well, all societies and cultures throughout all of history have believed in a creator. So we believe in a creator, but we need to know who this God is. And Psalm 111 starts to talk about who this God is. It says in verse 7, the works of his hands are truth and justice, and all his instructions are trustworthy. This tells us about who God is when we see truth and justice. You catch that? This reminds me of Romans chapter 1. A recognition that there is right and wrong. That's what truth and justice is, right? That's when we say there's a right and a wrong. And this right and wrong is proof that there must be a God. Our own conscience sees that there's a righteousness that exists outside of us, above us, beyond us. You can't tell what goodness is by looking at the actions of people. The only way we know what goodness is when we look at and we realize that it comes from God, because people do not act good. When left to ourselves, we're evil. The way we feel that guilt, the conscience, the guilt is a recognition there's a truth beyond me. It's a recognition that there is a justice. When I cry, when my heart hungers for justice, that's a recognition of God. If creation tells us is a God, the Bible tells us about God, his instructions, what he says. His instructions are trustworthy. This is what is it that God requires? His instructions are trustworthy. Truth and uprightness. The next verse, what God says is right. And he has sent redemption, he says. That redemption that he has sent, well, that's what God has done. We need to know more than just the mere existence of God. We need to know his will for us. That is the difference between truth and wisdom. In Psalm 111:10, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. You see, we don't just need to know the truth that God exists. We need to know God. And that's much more important, isn't it? You know, we want to try to help people get from the point where they will agree, okay, God does exist, to where they will then give in to the idea, not only does he exist, but he has redeemed. He has worked for our redemption. We follow his instructions. We live for him. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. This is the difference between the truth of God's existence and the wisdom of following him. And so that's where we want people to move. Yeah, there's a God. Look around. It's not hard to tell, is it? We see all creation. We know God exists. In our own hearts, we have this sense of right and wrong, this guilt conscience that we have, which tells us God exists and God has a word for us. God has a goal and a will for us, and we want to know him and know his will. What are his instructions? What does he say is right? What does he say is wrong? What has God done? And we will follow him. Well, I hope that helps as you teach this week. Some challenging lessons as we work through this section and of Bible Studies for Life in this quarter. I'm really looking forward to all the lessons. Thank you for teaching. Thanks for watching. Hope it was helpful to you. Thanks for giving of your time and your effort to grow the kingdom and make a difference in the kingdom. And I hope and pray that God will use this to help you as you do that, and you impact people's lives, to point them towards the God who loves them and the God who gave himself for them. God bless you. We'll see you next time.